This week's guest is an author. As sites like Roku Depot and others have said, we have some of the biggest and best authors, well, currently around on our show. We've had R.A. Salvatore, Timothy Zahn. We've had Michael Moorcock, Kevin J. Anderson, Barbara Hamley, Steve Perry, Paul S. Kemp, Aaron M. Evans. We've had many of them. Recently, we've been doing the Sundering series for Forgotten Realms, Wizards of the Coast. We've had the first book is by R.A. Salvatore, called The Companions. The second one was The Godborn by Paul S. Kemp. The third one was The Adversary by Aaron M. Evans. This is the fourth book, and as I was saying, we have some of the biggest authors. We have a very big fantasy author on today. His name is Richard Lee Byers. He's written over 30 fantasy and horror books that include many for the Forgotten Realms. He's also written books called, such as The Vampire's Apprentice in 1992, Forbidden in 2003. In the Realms, he wrote Halls of Stormweather. He wrote the Year of the Rogue Dragons trilogy, Queen of the Depths, the Haunted Lands trilogy, Brotherhood of the Griffin, and many more. And now he's written book 4 of The Sundering. Richard Lee Byers is a native of Ohio, who originally studied actually psychology and worked in the mental health field for quite a while before he became a writer. So this is someone who offers a very unique and pretty awesome side to this. And of course, this is book 4 of The Sundering, The Reaver, which comes out February 4th. That is Tuesday on Amazon, on Audible, and many other places. Of course, you can buy it on Amazon through our Amazon link. There'll be the banners in the show notes. And if you guys like this interview, go buy the book. It's fantastic. I have read it. And this is, as always with The Sundering, they all stand alone. So go check out this one. It is the Reaver by Richard Lee Byers. Now let's get to this interview that I did with fantasy author of The Forgotten Realms, Richard Lee Byers. So why don't we begin by having you introduce book 4 of The Sundering, The Reaver, and where exactly it fits in the series.
Okay. This book shows the effect of the sundering on the region of the Sea of Fallen Stars, where there is a nonstop rain and flooding and crop failure and general calamity, misery, and hardship. And against that background, you have the faiths of two very different gods that are vying for the allegiance of the people, and essentially saying, follow the path of this god, and it's the way through all this trouble. And each of those faiths is associated with a chosen. There's a chosen who is an undead pirate, who is the agent of Umberlee, the evil goddess of the sea, and there's a little boy who is the chosen of Lathander, who is a god that was considered to have left the realms 100 years ago, but has now returned. And as they basically each vie for the hearts and minds of the people, there is a pirate named Anton Marivaldi, who is the most or one of the most ruthless, infamous pirates operating in the region. And even though he's a very unlikely candidate to be the champion of anything other than his own welfare, he becomes integral to the struggle between these two faiths.
I am familiar with at least some of your Realms books, and is it true that Anton is totally original for this book?
Yeah, that's correct.
So all the other books focus on we have Kemp, we had Evans, we had Salvatore, and they all focus on their characters that they've built up a long time, and these are continuations of their stories. Why did you go in the direction of a totally original character for the middle book of this series?
Well, really it was logistical. None of the characters that I have been working with before was well placed to go to this particular region and get involved in this particular conflict. I write the Brotherhood of the Griffin series. And at the end of the last one of those books, Prophet of the Dead, I just didn't leave them in a place where it made rational sense for them to get to the Sea of Fallen Stars at this particular time frame and be doing all the stuff that the hero of this book needed to do. So it just made more sense to go with a new character. And I think he came out pretty well. So, people seem to have a good reaction to him. So I think it all worked out.
I definitely agree that he turned out pretty well. This is the most, well, it's a pirate book, so it's the most swashbuckling of them all, because we had Salvatore, which is more about reuniting all these characters. We have Kemp, which was really dark. We have Evans continuing her strong female characters. In this one, this is, I guess I'll compare it to movies. It's like watching Pirates of the Caribbean. It's swashbuckling, it's fun, it moves pretty fast, and it's full of action that we can really relate to, because it's not all, as I say, magical out there action. It's stuff that you can actually see in your mind really, really well, and it's a lot of fun. You captured me from the very, very first chapter when they take the boy, Stead,
right,
and capture. That was really, really well done. So, what were your goals when you were making this story? Did you have a specific type of theme you wanted to capture? What were you trying to do on a personal level in this book?
Well, of course, I'm always just trying to tell a kick-ass adventure story. Beyond that, Lathander is a god of hope and redemption and new beginnings. So I thought it was important to tell a story that would connect with that thematically. And as the characters evolve through the book, you can see that I'm working with that idea. In terms of the Sundering itself, I had a couple assignments basically that show this aspect of the Sundering and this other aspect of the Sundering. So I had to make sure that the plot was built around that stuff too.
And if I'm guessing right, Lathander is also the Anominator?
Amountator is how I say it.
Okay.
I hope I got that right. If I didn't, don't smack me too hard, Ed Greenwood.
Well, the god of the sun, the light that's featured in Kemp's book, this is the same Lathander. They just have different names and different parts, right?
Well, in Forgotten Realms lore, the god of the sun goes through various incarnations over time. And when I started writing about the realms, he was Lathander. And then when we had the spell plague and the 100-year time jump, he became Amountator. And now that we have the Sundering, Amountator becomes Lathander again. So yeah, it's all the same guy, although it's kind of like Doctor Who regenerating.
Okay.
The kind of personality of the god and what the primary concerns of the god vary somewhat from one incarnation to the next.
What drew you to want to use Umberlee? Because Umberlee is not really used that much, at least not in recent years, where we've had Mask and Shar and the Spider Goddess and so on. Umberlee is one that I haven't seen used very much in recent years. What drew you to wanting to use the Goddess of Ocean's Currents, well, the Ocean one?
Well, first off, I had written about Umberlee before in my book Queen of the Depths, so I was comfortable working with her. And also, again, this is something that was a very natural choice in terms of my part of the Sundering, because I knew I was going to write about the flooding and the rising sea. So, the sea goddess just made perfect sense to be the kind of bad antagonist god in the story.
We've heard from other authors, how the Sundering got put together. So how were you chosen for the Sundering, or what was your initial role when you were brought in there, and how did you feel about being involved in, I guess, D&D 5, D&D Next, whatever they're calling it now, as they shift the story from the Spell Plague to the new era of Forgotten Realms?
Well, I was thrilled to be brought in because, it's a real vote of confidence, and the expectation is these books are going to do well, and it was a chance to work with a whole bunch of people that, I think the world of as writers, and who are also, just great people to hang out with, Bob and Ed, Troy and Paul and Aaron. So, everything about it was positive. As far as, how I got brought in, I was probably pretty much the same thing that other people have already told you, in terms of they asked us, do you want to do it? And when you say that you do, then they brought us all out to a big multi-day story conference in the home office where we hashed out who was going to tackle which aspect of the Sundering and in which order, and kicked around, story ideas and where we might go coming out of the series. And then we all, went home and worked from there. And there have been, there was another follow-up meeting after that, and a lot of email communication.
What were the greatest challenges to writing this story? Because you're in the middle of a series now, a series that is connected with the overarching themes and well, not really characters, overarching themes and ideas and the struggle for the gods and so on. But as far as the characters go, there's not really any interlocking, interconnecting. Was this a challenge to you, or what were the big challenges writing the middle story of this so far pretty darn epic series?
Well, I didn't think it was too much more challenging than writing any other novel, actually, because even though The Sundering is a series where all the books go to, form a great panoramic picture of what's happening in the realms, each book in the series is actually a standalone. You could just, if you wanted to, you could just read that story and everything would be perfectly clear. So that was actually a lot easier than working on something like War of the Spider Queen, which I was also a writer on, where all 6 writers are really telling one long serialized story and everything had to be very coordinated. And you absolutely couldn't deviate from the overall series outline that had been established in terms of where you left the characters and where you left the situation, because if you did, you'd be screwing all the writers that were working from that outline that came after you. That was much tougher. This really wasn't so bad. I mean, I was responsible for, like I said, displaying certain aspects of The Sundering, but beyond that, pretty much how I did it was up to me. It was like when I wrote the Haunted Lands trilogy. We knew that the realm of Fae was going to evolve in a particular way, and I had to, that's how I had to leave it. But for everything else about that story, I was pretty much free to make up. The editors, of course, look over your shoulder and say yes or no, but I had a lot of creative freedom with that, and I had a lot of creative freedom with the Sundering book, too.
So having written a lot of books in the realms over the years, especially as, we've changed from different eras of the realms, how do you feel about the future of the realms going into what's known as D&D 5, the post-Sundering era? Do you feel the Sundering is set up quite well for a new opportunity to create new, fresh characters and worlds?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really cool. We had... the last big upheaval was, the Spell Plague and the 100-Year Time Jump. And that stuff was done to create fresh opportunities for, new stories, new characters, new beginnings. And I think a lot of what we did then was positive, but it's also become clear in retrospect that in the course of doing that, we lost some elements that people who enjoy the realms really liked. And without going into too many specifics, because I don't want to spoil the stories for people, the Sundering's going to bring a lot of that back. So it's, people who felt like, well, yeah, I kind of feel like the classic realms feel is not there. After the Sundering, it should be back there. Stuff that people really like should be back there. But at the same time, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for new adventures, new situations, new antagonists. So, yeah, I think it's going to be great.
A little bit back onto your book. So you have the main character, Anton. What was your main inspiration for him? You said you wanted to create a character that fit into your story, fit into, the Sundering tale. What drew you to Anton, and how did his character evolve as you created him?
Well, it was at the big story conference that we decided that each of the books in the series was going to have as a central character somebody that embodied one of the archetypal D&D character classes. And my book was going to be the fighter, which was good with me. I like writing about those kind of characters. And with the Sea of Fallen Stars being the locale, and the fact that piracy has always been a big part of that region, it just made sense to make the guy a pirate. So I had that much. And then I thought, well, my stuff, I think, compared to some stuff that some other fantasy writers does, tends to be a little darker and a little more realistic, at least when I'm in the right mood. So I felt like, well, I just don't feel like really making him completely the sort of, jolly rogue, Errol Flynn kind of character. I would rather do somebody that is a little bit more like a real world character, somebody who is, somebody who is actually kind of a merciless killer, at least at the start of the story. And then when I thought more about it and realized, well, then I can I can work with him in a way that ties in very well with the idea of Lathander as the god of redemption and second chances. It all just kind of evolved from there.
What about the boy, Stead, who is in here as the representative of the god of light and basically the avatar of good for this story? What inspired your creation of the boy?
Well, first off, I knew that he couldn't be some big kick-ass character who can take care of himself, because the whole plot of the story involves him, people trying to abduct him and other people trying to protect him and things like that. So a child made sense on that level. A child also made sense in terms of the idea of Lathander being the god of rebirth, and new beginnings, somebody young. And he makes a really nice contrast to Evander Highcastle, the Chosen of Umberley, who is this hulking, bloated, undead pirate who is kind of like what the real world, like Blackbeard, might have been like if he'd come back from being drowned for a while. You see this monstrosity, this huge monstrosity on one side, and this little boy on the other. It's a pretty effective contrast, I think.
I have to agree. It would, for me, it came out rather perfectly as far as the contrast goes. Now that you bring it up.
Well, thank you.
So, when it comes to these stories, I know that I guess Wizards of the Coast owns them. How much input do they have in the creation of your stories? Like, for example, this one, you had your initial meeting and you said you had a couple follow-ups. How much control do they give you over creating a story versus they tell you what to make and then they make sure you make that story?
Well, in theory, they could micromanage everything you did, because when you're working in a shared world like this, doing what's called work for hire, it's ultimately their intellectual property. But in practice, I've always found that they've given me a whole lot of creative freedom. I don't know if that's just because, we're on the same page and they tend to like my ideas or what, but they're normally, very, very positive in terms of the ideas that I bring them and the approach that I want to take. It's like I said, they're, given the story, there will be certain things that you got to do. Like I said, the Sundering, I have to show what's going on in the Sea of Fallen Stars, have to deal with the return of Lathander. That was set. But, beyond that, it was, just tell a good story that does that stuff.
So, you've been, other ones haven't mentioned this. So you were saying that they basically divided up the series into different locations and slightly different times so that each location could be covered throughout these 6 books. Am I correct?
Well, I'm not sure if the important thing in every book was to nail a certain location. The important thing in every book was to nail a certain aspect of the Sundering. And my aspect of the Sundering that I'm covering happens to be location linked. I was specifically showing what's going on in the Sea of Fallen Stars because, that's the way that ends up is important to what the new realms are going to be. Now, in the case of Paul's book, I think that he was, I don't want to give anything away, but I think, that he was charged primarily with showing certain things that are going on in the divine world. So I don't imagine that the earthly parts of his story, that anybody was saying, use this location. I don't recall that from the meeting anyway. So, each of us had a specific job, and they weren't all as geographically nailed down as mine was, I don't believe.
Okay. So were you guys actually assigned different eras or different things, or did you say, I want to do a book in this era, when will it fit in the series? How did they ended up dividing it then?
Well, I think that the order of the books was partly determined by sales figures. I mean, leading with Bob was a great idea because, Bob's books all sell so incredibly well. And so, lead with one of his books, and all his fans pick it up. And if we're lucky, then they get hooked on the whole series and they pick up the other books. So that was one aspect. Having Ed on the back end makes sense because Ed is the grand architect of the Forgotten Realms, and he can kind of back cleanup. Anything that any of the rest of us did do to put the realms in order going forward, he'll perceive that we haven't done it yet, and he'll do it in his book. Other issues were kind of based on a particular writer's schedule. I remember Troy saying that he needed his book to be towards the back because of other projects and deadlines that he had to do before he could write that book. And then kind of the final consideration is that there was a rough timeline that had been worked out and for events within the Sunring, and it could be tinkered with, but to the extent that we didn't need to tinker with it because of other considerations, it indicate, if a timeline said, well, this stuff happens, and that's the stuff of Aaron's book, and then this stuff happens, and that's the stuff of Richard's books. Well, Aaron's book wouldn't logically come before my book without us having to mess around with the timeline anymore.
So have you had the opportunity to read the previous 3 books leading up, and did you make any changes after you knew how those ones were actually going to turn out, just tweaking your story a little bit?
Well, I didn't really have to tweak it because, like I said, it's actually a standalone story in its own right. It's not like Drizzt, shows up in my book or anything. So I didn't really have to make any changes. We had as much mapped out as we needed to map out beforehand. I have done a little bit of I did do a little bit of extra consultation with Aaron and Troy though, because my character Stead actually is introduced as a very minor character in Aaron's book, and one of my minor characters from the Reaver is going to go on and make a reappearance in Troy's book. So we had to make sure all that stuff was in sync.
When it comes to writing in the realms, are you allowed to use other writers' characters in your books if it fits? And if so, what's the process for using? Like, if you wanted to have Drizzt show up, would you be allowed to? Or is there a lot of process to make that possible?
Well, first off, I think in the case of Drizzt, I probably would not be allowed to. Ultimately, these characters belong to Wizards of the Coast. So if they said, yeah, you can use Drizzt or you can use Elminster, I guess I would be allowed to, but I would never do it without getting the blessing of the writer that actually created and generally writes about that character. I think that would be a huge, transgression against authorial courtesy and ethics. And really, I'm not eager to use other novelist characters anyway, because the potential for screwing up continuity or getting the characterization wrong is kind of just too great. I do use characters from the source books, but that's not as big a deal, particularly if you leave them as you found them. They just kind of appear as secondary figures that, send the hero off on a quest or something, and but they remain the same guy. You normally don't have, my experience, you don't normally have any problem getting permission to do that. You do have, it is a little bit bigger deal to take one of those characters and radically change him or kill him, which I have done a couple of times. But they'll sign off on that too if they don't have big plans for him anyway, and if if they really like the story you're gonna tell.
Okay, so now a little bit about yourself, since I've read that you have a master's degree in psychology and that you've worked in emergency psychiatric facilities and so on. I currently have a degree in psychology and I work in a mental hospital.
Oh.
How was your experience working with psychiatric facilities, having a degree in psychology? How has that influenced your writing as far as your change from that to creating fantasy and other stories. Has it helped you at all? And if so, what's been the greatest aids it's given?
Well, I think it's been helpful to a degree when I've been writing about characters who suffer from some actual form of psychopathology. I think it's can be occasionally helpful just writing characters in generally, but probably actually not as much as I thought it was going to be when I first got into it. And part of the reason I went into psychology in the first place was I thought, I'm going to go on and be a fiction writer eventually, and it's going to be so much help to have all this academic knowledge about theories of personality and stuff like that. And I do draw it on it once in a while, but I've decided that what's truly important to creating effective characters is more just kind of empathy and imagination. You just have to imagine a character with a certain background and certain set of tendencies, and then kind of crawl inside his skin and imagine being that character confronted with a particular situation. That's a lot more useful generally than knowing, Freud or Jung or Rogers or whoever.
So what got you to want to leave the mental health field to become a writer, which the mental health field pays usually significantly more than writing unless you get really, really big? What got you to want to do the change?
Well, I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I mean, that's been a constant pretty much ever since I can remember. But I listened to all that advice that people give you early on about you'll never make a living as a writer. It's so hard to be a writer and make it. And I mean, that stuff is actually all true, but it really shouldn't. If that's what you want to do, you shouldn't let it hold you back from taking your best shot. But I did listen to that advice, and so what I decided is, well, I'll go into psychology because I do think it's interesting, and I'll learn all this stuff that will help me write in my spare time. But I'll have a real day job in psychology or mental health field one way or another. And so I did. I got the degree, I got the job, but what I found out was that for me, working in mental health was so draining that when I came home, I didn't want to sit down and focus and write anything. So for years, I really didn't. And then finally, my mom passed away, and she left me some money. And this was at a time when I'd really gotten pretty burned out on the job I was doing. And I thought, well, I can take this money and I can live for a while. Not well, but I can do it. And I could quit this job and I could just focus on writing. And I need to either do that or I need to admit to myself that this is something that I'm never going to do and just kind of put it aside. And I decided to take my shot and went from there.
So at this time, do you just write? 'Cause I know Kemp, I believe he's an attorney. I know Salvatore does side projects with video games and other things. I know Evans is an editor and does other stuff too. Do you just do writing and you live off that, or do you have side projects you do as well?
A while back, I was an online teacher on the side part-time, and I lost that gig. So now I'm just a writer. And I have been at other points in my career. I'm kind of waiting to see if I need to pick up another gig or not right now. I'm in one of those waiting periods where I'm going to see if a lot of wonderful things are going to happen in relation to writing, or maybe not so much, and I need to pick up some other thing. But the dream is to be a writer all the time. That's when I'm happiest, when I can just do that.
And then I suppose also with your writing, you get to go to conventions, meet the fans. Do you like meeting the fans, and what are some of your best or favorite experiences that involve meeting with fans, hearing from fans when it comes to your writing?
Oh, yeah, meeting fans is always awesome, or hearing from them. I mean, it's just such a boost. I think that I think what I appreciated the most is when I'm at some convention where, there are people who are much bigger deal than me as guests, and or it's a convention where although they're having me there, the stuff that I write really isn't the main focus. Like if somehow I wind up at an anime convention or something like that, and in that circumstance, you can really kind of feel your delusions of being a big deal wither away pretty quickly when it seems like nobody knows or cares who you are. And in those circumstances, when then somebody approaches you and asks for a signature, or just comes up to say they like your books or something, it makes you feel so great. The contrast is astonishing. But meeting fans or hearing from this always just terrific.
So I guess we need to begin wrapping this up. So your book comes out February 4th. It is book 4 of The Sundering. What would you like to tell to the listeners or the fans, to get them to buy your book and go home and enjoy it?
Okay. Well, first off, it's a kick-ass, fast-paced fantasy adventure. It's got interesting characters who evolve through the course of the story. It sounds very egotistical for me to say all that, but we've sent out a bunch of advanced review copies, and that's what the reviewers are saying. So I don't feel too sheepish about saying it for myself, because I'm just saying what they're saying. If you're interested in the future of the Forgotten Realms, this is a book where some of the big changes from the Sundering hit, and you will see it change in ways that I think will be very interesting and appealing to longtime fans. It also sets up some big stories that I'm looking forward to telling going forward. So you can this character I very much hope is going to continue and have some great adventures still before him. So this is your chance to pick him up from the start and follow him in the years ahead.
So you do plan on writing more stories featuring Anton and what's going on here? Yeah,
it's I don't have titles or release dates to announce yet or anything. Well, there's not a finalized deal for all that with the publisher quite yet, but the character is definitely set up to move forward. I mean, this book is complete in itself. You'll get a complete story, not some cliffhanger ending or something, but when you read to the end, you will see that more adventures await ahead.
Awesome. So if people love this story, they can expect hopefully to get more in the future. And of course, the best way to do that is buy the book.
That's certainly the case. Buy one for every room in your house. Buy one for all your friends.
Well, thank you very much, sir. If people want to get hold of you, ask you questions, follow more of your work, where can they follow your work or send you questions or anything like that?
Well, you can find all the stuff I've written just by looking me up on Amazon. That's an easy way. As far as contacting me, my email address is rleebyers@mac.com, rleebyers@mac.com. You can friend me on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter. You can add me to your circles on Google+. I write a monthly opinion column for the science fiction news site Airlock Alpha, so you can look on there and get a little essay from me once a month, and I hope people do some of that stuff. Facebook's probably where I mouth off the most often, so that's a good place to check up on what I'm doing.
Well, thank you very much, sir. This has been an honor again, listeners. The book comes out February 4th. It is book 4 of The Sundering. It's called The Reaver, and it's by Lee Byers. And I hope you guys go check it out because it's a fascinating book, and I'll probably finish it tonight because I have a long shift at the hospital, and when you're on watches, you read a lot. At least I do. So thank you very much, sir.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's been great.